Welcome to HotSpot. I'm your host, Gabriel Moncau. Here with me at the top right is Phillip Tran, my trusty co-host. Also with me on the BU Gaming Club Valorant teams, and has done a ton of tech stuff before. You'll see him a lot. I won't introduce him extensively. He'll be here every episode. At the bottom left, we are joined by Rudhra Raveendran. I believe you go by Rudy. You are a current UPE alumnus, BU class of 20, and a full-time software engineer at Microsoft. And at the bottom right, our other guest is Mr. Benji Spetter-Goldstein, BU class of 21, previously an Amazon intern and the current UPE director of operations. So how are you guys all doing today?
Doing good. Yeah, just as an update, I did sign a full-time offer with Amazon as well since I last talked about stuff. So
congratulations.
GG.
Exciting news.
So I think that's a good place to start, right? Today we're going to be talking about just all things big tech, and obviously you two, Mr. Benji and Rudy, clearly have experience in those fields. The rest of us, we've seen what has happened, seen the fallout, seen the excitement and the disappointment, and we can revel in the chaos. But what experience do you guys really have, just to share with everybody here? I mean, we've mentioned Amazon and Microsoft. How'd you guys sort of get started working in all these fields?
Benji, you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So yeah, I think my path was pretty typical. I did some coding stuff for fun, different projects randomly, and then decided to major in CS in high school. I did first too in high school. I majored in CS in college. I did first in high school too. So a lot of I didn't do so much programming at first. I did more mechanical type stuff, and some also business type stuff and other things. But I did do a little bit of programming. And I had a side interest in programming. I took summer classes and stuff like that. So I was ready to do CS by the time I got into college. And then from there, it's not too crazy to get into big tech. If you're already in school, you just apply to stuff and hope it works out. And I think I started really applying to internships my sophomore year. And I got an internship at a company called WorldPay, which was based in Lowell, Massachusetts. They're now part of FIS. But yeah, that was payment processing. It was a pretty standard software engineering internship. Lasted the summer, and then the next year I applied to stuff again, and I wound up going with Amazon for that year for my internship. And now I'm here. And if you do good in the internship, you get a return offer. So I got a return offer, applied some other places just to see what I could get. Got another offer that I didn't love so much with Microsoft. No offense, Rudy.
Unlucky.
I went with the Amazon offer. No, they wanted to give me an offer in Georgia, in Atlanta. I was I'm not down with that. Not after this election, no. So I took the Amazon offer in Seattle.
Cool. As for me, I guess if you want the whole spiel, I started programming in high school as well. Just did web development. Interestingly enough, I also did FIRST Robotics, except I contributed. Yeah, I contributed nothing though, to my first group. I would kind of just sit in the sidelines and watch. But then I came to BU. I joined Boston Hacks and Make BU, two big hacker communities, and I really like hackathons. And so for me, that was my path into big tech, because I did a challenge at a hackathon that was sponsored by Intuit. Or the challenge was sponsored by Intuit, not the whole hackathon. And then me and my friend won their challenge. Intuit gave me an interview. I interned twice at Intuit, and then I got Microsoft just from applying, and a little bit of referrals here and there.
That's pretty cool. So I think, obviously, there's a lot to talk about. I think the easiest place to just dive in is, what do you guys think about the tech experiences that you've had? Have you sort of regretted some of the things that you may have been involved with, or has there been specific opportunities that you may want to get involved with in the future? And are there companies that jump out at you? Is there one company that you're man, I would really like to intern with them, or somebody that you did work with and you were that was a really good time, or something like that?
I mean, my general take is that different areas of tech have a lot more in common than they do not. Honestly, everything's pretty team by team, but it generally works pretty similar ways. You have your thing that you're working on, you're doing software work in that some capacity. et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it makes a huge difference whether you're at like a big tech company or like, more of a startup, except for maybe like job security stuff. Like you might want to go bigger, but otherwise, yeah, I don't think there's anything that's special about big tech from like experience of like intern or STE1 or whatever the equivalent level is at like other places. I think it's pretty universal. So it's nice though, because like your experience at one place is pretty transferable to like another location. Like you get a good sense for how different things work, and yeah, I think it helps you out.
Yeah, I'd agree with most of that. I'd say that the biggest difference that I noticed between like interning at a startup and then like Intuit, which they're a pretty big company, but then like Microsoft and like Amazon are like even bigger than Intuit. I'd say just like the bigger up the company you go, just like the more bureaucracy you're going to deal with, and the more you're going to have to wait on getting stuff done. Like when my first internship in college was at a startup, and I think I was like their 8th employee. At Neuroflash, they do like AI for Salesforce, and it was just like I'd have free reign to do whatever I want. Basically, I'm given a task and just do it however you want as long as it gets done. And at Intuit, it's a little bit more restrictive because I was working on like a product team, like whatever we did, like customers would see it, so you can't just do whatever you want because people are going to see it. And then now at Microsoft, I'm now doing more of like a back end internal thing for data scientists. Like even then, like there's, especially when you're dealing with like data and AI, and this is like a thing I think all companies have to deal with now, is you have to be very careful about like data. You can't just like allow like any random employee, right, to see like customer data. And so there's just like a lot of, and for good reason too, there's like lots of approvals and bureaucracy that has to go in before you can do anything relating to data, which it is what it is. Like you have to do it. But it's definitely like, I guess, not as exciting as like, just having free reign to just do whatever you want.
Yeah, I guess for those of us that haven't really been involved with those bigger tech companies, we've only done things smaller scale, it's kind of hard to understand how all that bureaucracy works, right? We might have like a theoretical idea of what it might be like in those environments, but I'm sure it's different once you're actually there, especially people who have just done projects on their own and just sort of gotten to work on exactly they want. But it sounds like you guys have had a pretty good time, at least from your descriptions, of working on what you wanted to do and getting those opportunities, right? More or
Yeah.
less.
I say I feel pretty lucky in that like like even at Intuit and like even now at Microsoft, I feel that relative to other parts of the companies, like I was put on teams that had like more new projects, so like less legacy code, and like there still might be like approvals and stuff that needs to get done, but the implementation is up to you, which I think is like the best position to be in. You don't have to deal with maintaining anybody else's code. Um, and I just want to, before I forget, I just want to bring up a point where you said like you asked what are things that you like particularly liked about a specific company. I do think I only interned at Intuit and some startups, but from hearing from other people, I think I can say hands down, Intuit has the best internship program. So you guys should intern there for one reason and one reason only. They give the interns cars. Nobody else does that. Like, and I think my last internship there, they were saying like, oh, we might phase this out because interns like hit the cars all the time. But if you're lucky enough that they still do it, while you're an intern there, definitely take advantage of that, because like it's one thing to like, it's still cool to like visit a new city and all, but, like interning, like if you can't really get around, then you can't really do much. So
That's super interesting for sure. And I think when it comes to picking those companies that you want to work with, that you want to be involved with in the future, there's just so much that we could get into there with what sort of makes a company more preferable. And I think that the place to start, right, which I think Phillip is going to have some thoughts on this, and I'm interested in getting his as well. We have relentlessly mocked Phillip within our group because we have this little triangle between the Windows user, the Linux user, and the Apple user, all with their own little ecosystems. He falls under one of those while I fall in a different one, and we'll see how it plays out here. But I think that innovation in tech companies is something that, in my opinion at least, is very attractive. I like the idea of working for a company that I think is very much always pushing the boundaries of what you do, and whether they're on the bleeding edge of tech and stuff like that. I find that really cool. But there's definitely multiple ways that you can go about doing this. I mean, there's some companies that clearly invest more money into startups and trying new things and making new products all the time, while there are others that want to refine their already existing product lines and work more within their existing ecosystems. So what do you guys sort of think about that? Which approach appeals more to you and why?
I mean, I'm like notoriously like a big Apple hater, and I think for me doing new interesting things is like definitely preferable in the company. But like I don't know, from the perspective of working at a company, I think it's more team by team. I think like at least among the big ones, everyone's doing something new or interesting or something cool, even if they haven't told the public about it yet. So you could wind up on the cool team. You could wind up on a team that does something that's maybe less exciting. Like I wouldn't say the team I work on at Amazon is particularly exciting in what they do, but it is like an interesting challenge. Like I work on the bundles team at Amazon, so uh, like it seems like pretty like lackluster, just like as a team. Like you're not saying like, oh, I'm on the AI team that does like this data analysis and all of this. I'm on like this other cool team that uses this really neat tech. Like, but even like something as like seemingly straightforward as like bundles has like a lot that goes into it, a lot that's interesting to learn about from a technical challenge. So I think that like from a consumer standpoint, obviously I like being on the bleeding edge, but in terms of where I work, I think as long as the work remains interesting and relevant, like it could be literally anything, I'd still probably be pretty interested in it. Well, except for things that I think are morally not for me, but other than that.
Gotcha. And may I like ask you more about your role on the bundles team, what that team does in the first place, and what you do?
Yeah, so I won't get into too much because I am under NDA, but
Yep,
um,
that'll get
I'll
you.
yeah, but I'll say that the way the bundles team works mostly is like when you buy something on Amazon, like there are different bundles. Like you might get, for example, like like an Amazon Echo Dot with like Amazon Music Unlimited, right? That might be a good example of a bundle. And that's actually an interesting challenge because those are two very different products. Like one's like a digital subscription, one's a physical device. And so there's a lot of work that goes into the back end that makes you able to buy those two products together, have everything work out in terms of purchasing it, being able to like have your physical device come and the subscription activate and everything, and also just allow the creation of all these different bundles within just their existing ecosystem. So it's a lot of pipeline stuff and a lot of working within this sort of really interesting tech stack that Amazon's already set up. But I think that the challenge is actually it's a lot more complicated than you think, just based off of the initial conceit.
And Amazon's definitely big into that interconnected like ecosystem stuff, so I can imagine how that must be certainly interesting on the back end. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm a full disclosure big Microsoft fan. I like Amazon too,
Hey.
but I'm a big Microsoft fan. I like how Microsoft is just involved in so many different fields. It's not just that they are involved in one field and they have like a ton of products. They're even just involved in like a ton of different fields as well, which I think is really cool. And I like how they fund those startups. So I would be particularly interested in also just seeing what you think, Rudy, of sort of that mentality.
Yeah. So to your first point about like different places are able to tackle like but from the size of a small startup to like a big company, I think pretty much everybody, yeah, every single company is probably going to have some team or a few teams at least that do like R&D. They do the cool new stuff, and I guess just like depending on which company you work at, your probability of being on that team will be higher or lower. Like if it's like a startup doing a bleeding edge thing, then 100%. Like Microsoft also has like a ton of like teams. I don't even know what all of them do, but there's definitely tons of ones that are doing like cool new stuff. That's part of the reason why I wanted to go to Microsoft, was just because like I knew that regardless of whatever team I get assigned on, like there's always a possibility of just lateral movement later. Like if there's another team that's really cool. Um, but I'm still too early for me to be able to decide that. But yeah, like yeah, I don't know any of those teams in particular, so I can't like tell you anything about like innovations happening. And even if I did, I think I too would be under NDA. So
No, for sure. Yeah, I'm just thinking back. I remember for the product division club here at BU, they brought in a product manager who was previously working on the HoloLens team for Microsoft and is now working on one of the many like smart home devices at Amazon. And it's just so cool to see how those are like the tech. I mean, it's all tech, but those are two very seemingly different fields that he sort of jumped between. He's an engineer first and then became a product manager. But I guess it's just really cool to see how in like those big tech fields, there's just so many different teams and different projects being pursued like that. People think, I think people think a lot about these as like single target entities. They look at Amazon, they're like, oh, it's the website. I click on things, it goes in the cart, and then it shows up at my door. They look at Microsoft and they're like Xbox. But it's so much more than that in so many ways. Yeah. It's so much more than that, I think, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think all these tech companies. Whoops. I think all these tech companies are really delving into a bunch of different niches. Even though most consumers think of them as doing one thing, you look at Google. Oh, that's a search engine, right? But they also have an Office suite. Stadia, RIP, doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work very well. Bunch of other products, some of which come out of the oven and then just get abandoned years later, which is something I think is very interesting to see that Google does innovate a lot, but they also leave behind a lot of dead projects in their wake.
Yeah, I think once you get to a certain critical mass with these like mega tech companies, they sort of have the ability to like say, we're going to throw a bunch of like eggs at the wall and see what sticks, or, so to speak. So, like, I think like by virtue of even one company entering the space, you'll see a bunch of other ones enter the space. Like even just streaming, like Amazon acquired Twitch, Microsoft had Mixer, and that died, RP Mixer. And they had like Google went with YouTube gaming, and then Microsoft, no, not Microsoft, then Google went with YouTube gaming, and then Facebook had their own thing, which is like Facebook gaming. So like all basically trying to do the same thing but compete with each other. And it seems like that's generally like what happens with like most of these things that they enter, like the smart home thing too, Google Home, Alexa, Facebook Portal, and I think Microsoft has Cortana or something like that. It keeps it going on.
Yeah, I disabled that.
Something like that.
The only exception to that is like Apple, who's like it seems
he said the A word. We're there. We got there.
Let's make bigger devices with fewer ports, or smaller devices with fewer ports, or whatever it is, rather than
both at the same time. Both at the same time.
So
simultaneously, more and less ports.
That triangle you mentioned earlier of the Linux, Windows, Mac. So where do you fall, Gabe? I'm assuming you're Windows.
I am the Windows individual. I only have something against one of the other 2 points, not both. And the other point that I have something against is on this show with me. So,
and it's not me, and it's not Rudhra.
Sure, yeah, no, definitely not. No, I'm kidding. I'm not a huge Apple guy. So when it comes to both of those, I think those are two interesting points to tackle, right? Because Linux has it's definitely not as widespread. I would say,
at least not on the desktop.
Consumer standpoint. Yeah, from the consumer standpoint, not necessarily from a client industrial standpoint, as the other two alternatives. And it's definitely not looked at the same way, but it's gained a status quite similar, I think, especially to people that know what they're talking about, as being representative of a very good niche, and people who like what they do are very keen to use it. I don't have a problem with Linux, but Apple. My problem with Apple isn't actually with their devices at all. It's not even with anything that they do. I think that they are very good at what they do, and I don't think that anybody can take that away from them. In fact, I think... Okay, well, Benji's going to try, but before Benji tries, I can't take it away from them. I think that they're quite good at what they do. It's just that I think that, in my opinion, they don't offer substantially better products enough to the alternatives to be worth their luxury price. I think that their price is inflated, not due to what they are offering in terms of tech or anything actually tangible, but rather due to two things. The first being the user experience, which a lot of people prefer. I personally don't. And the second being the idea that it's kind of a luxury item. It's almost a status symbol to a certain extent to have an iPhone or to have those latest devices, in my opinion. So I'm not willing to pay that price, and as such, I don't particularly like that business model. I also think that they have time and time again gone towards continuing that model rather than innovating and trying something new. They've been a fairly safe company, I think, all things considered, and I don't know that that'll last as long as some of the other Goliaths that we've seen. So that's my take on it, but I would love to get yours, and I can tell that Benji's ramping up here.
All right. I'll let Benji have the first word. But I will preface this by saying that I am a longtime Linux user, and I still love Linux. But please, don't soften your
blows. We don't have
blows.
any Apple fans here.
No, I'm
No,
recording this
none.
on a Mac.
Not a single one.
I mean, a ThinkPad T490.
Oh yeah, totally. Definitely not a Mac.
Yeah, so I guess my main thing is that I partially agree with you. I don't think Apple's UX is particularly compelling. I think people are just used to it, which is like fine, you know. I don't think it's like honestly that more or less like I obviously prefer Windows UX, but I'm very used to it. I have a stake in this game, you know what I mean? But I don't think their UX is especially more compelling, I would say. I don't think it's especially less compelling. I don't think it's especially more compelling though. But I think like again, the driver of the price is the branding. I think when you buy Apple, you're buying the Apple brand, right? It's very unified hardware, very unified look. My real gripe with Apple comes from the fact that I just don't think, well, other than the Apple tax, I just don't think that they write very good software. I've never had a piece of Apple software where I'm like, oh, that piece of Apple software, love that piece of Apple software. And whenever I ask someone, I'm like, what Apple software do you really love? Nobody can think of anything.
Well, I can.
No one's ever hit me with like, oh, this is like an excellent piece of Apple software that's very well written and designed. And like most people could give me is like, I guess Apple Music is okay. And I'm like, but is it like that much better than its competitor? Is it like that much better than Spotify?
I mean,
they're all like, not really.
I'd argue that like the most visible piece of Apple software, and also probably its best, would just be the operating systems that they make, like iOS and Mac OS.
I'd also counter that with their professional software suite. Logic Pro is by far my favorite digital audio workstation. Final Cut Pro, also one of my favorite video editing suites.
That's true. I have to give it to Final Cut. Final Cut's pretty good.
Those are made by
no,
Apple.
but it is licensed. Was Final Cut made by them? Let me check that.
Yeah, give me a little fact checkaroo. They are platform exclusive applications in any case, and I think that they are the best. But that's just me being an Apple fanboy and being very used to using those applications, though. I've started using a Mac in, let's see, last year, November last year, I believe. Yeah. That's when I actually decided to get a Mac. I got the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is an expensive machine for sure. And I will concede that in terms of hardware, you're going to get more out of your money if you get like a Dell XPS 15. But in terms of unified software experience and being able to synergize with the Apple ecosystem, I don't know if you can really put a price on that. It's not worth it for everybody, of course. But for me, I really like the convenience that the Apple ecosystem gives. I will say, though, that if you're going into the Apple ecosystem, you're going to be trapped in the Apple ecosystem, which is a big thing for some consumers, especially those who are into tech. You do not want to be trapped into a walled garden most of the time because you want your freedom. But for now, it hasn't bit me in the tail, and I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, so I guess what Rudy said about the OS, the thing about that to me, right, is when you're dealing with a consumer OS, you have like two basic components. The front end UX, which I think I already said, like, I just don't think is like that much more compelling, like over Windows. Like, again, I personally don't like it, but I think like even just from like any standpoint, like it's not especially compelling just as a UX. And then the second thing I would say is, and then the other thing is the backend, right? And Apple on the backend is just like their OSs on the backend are just Unix. You know what I mean? And that's like useful because like again, like I think I used that same computer you mentioned, 16-inch MacBook Pro, like as my work laptop all summer. That's like what Amazon sent me. And so that's what I usually work on. I'll probably be working on like, Mac OS again for my job. But when I use that, right, I just use it as like Unix, with like a
yeah, it's just a Unix-like environment for you. And that is one of the advantages to having a Mac. I'm comfortable in that Unix environment since I came from Linux. But I think it really depends what you're doing. In terms of the creative software that Apple gives you, those platform-exclusive applications, I really don't think they're matched even by the Adobe suite. But honestly, that's all up to personal preference and your own use case.
Yeah, like you mentioned, like I haven't worked extensively with like with Final Cut or Logic. I used Reason before, which is like also available on Windows. And I've used like a little bit of Premiere, but like nothing crazy. So maybe like if people, I think if companies are really like invested into that ecosystem, into those like products, which some are, like in the creative industry, like I can understand why they would use the US. But from like a consumer standpoint, I just don't think it's more compelling. And like again, like having what's basically a Unix OS with a code pane on it can be very nice. Like I'm not arguing with that. Like having Unix is like a detriment. I think I just think it's a very expensive form of Unix. Number one, and number
Yeah, it
two,
definitely is.
yeah, and number two, I just think from a consumer perspective, like I just don't see huge advantages. Like again, for a creative professional who's already invested into that ecosystem to begin with, sure, but even for creative professionals, right? There is a competing ecosystem, and you do get some economic factor over paying less money for your machines. So
I
it all
mean,
depends from a professional perspective, but from a consumer perspective, I don't really see Apple's compelling.
I think, all right, so I am a big Windows fanboy, but like this is gonna come down to use case, and I think that's the main reason why people use any of them. Is it's like I'm a big fan of Windows. I used Linux for like a few years in high school because I was a cheapskate and I was like, I want a free OS. And then I went back to Windows because Linux is just like a little bit too annoying for me to be a daily driver. But it's also come a long way since then. But anyway, I think that in the case of Apple, right, I also kind of agree that like it's stupid overpriced. They are really good at what they do. I would say like Apple is probably like the best company in terms of industrial design. Like they just can't be matched. Like their devices are sexy. You can't beat that. And like I would argue that their UX is very intuitive. Like other than like Linux and Windows is very, I'd say very verbose. Like, and I think Windows is trying to move towards more of like the intuitive thing, but like as in like there are buttons and like things are explained to you, whereas like Apple, like their whole thing is they try to go by like feel, right? Like you swipe and use gestures, and they try to be as intuitive as possible. Um, and I think that's like for somebody who isn't a power user, like all you're doing is writing notes, or you're like doing like your average college student, like Apple's pretty compelling because of the whole like just works thing. Because if all you're doing is using notes, it is pretty great. And but also, and granted, you can do that on all the other platforms, and they will just work. But then also, people are buying it for like I have an iPhone, I have an Apple like device, like for the cloud. Um, and I had this one conversation once. For developing, I'd say that like Macs are like pretty great development machines because they're like POSIX Unix systems on the back. So basically like using Linux, but it's like you have like the Apple support, which if you can pay for is great. And that was like the argument that my boss at my first internship gave me is he told me, I used to be just like you. I loved using Windows. I loved tinkering. And then one day I got too old to have time for that. So I just bought a Mac.
That is
And
what
I
I
think,
said to one of my friends who is a very, very fervent Linux user. As
yeah,
a
I mean
joke.
Linux is great, but like at some point, like managing everything yourself, it's all preference, really. Like if you care about that, if that matters a lot to you, then use Linux. If you just want like something where like Apple will handle everything for you, get Apple. And if you want to play video games, get Windows because nothing else can play video games.
I will say I
Um,
definitely get that appeal. Like especially for people that aren't as tech inclinated. I mean, we've got 4 comp sci majors on the call. It's definitely a bit of a biased like group. But I think, and I'll be interested. It'll be interesting to see what you guys think. But I think that especially for people that are less tech inclinated, I can totally get the appeal of like, okay, Apple's never going to come at you with some groundbreaking technology that revolutionizes any of their industries. They did so with like the iPod Touch back in the day and stuff, and ever since Mr. Jobs is gone, I don't see it happening again.
Apple Silicon.
Well, no, but with that said, I can understand the appeal, especially for those that are less tech inclinated. Of just like it's not going to change, it's not going to break as nearly as often as Linux, and not as often as Windows either, in my opinion. Now, yes, if it breaks, you're paying for a new one, you can't fix it. But
No, it's all one
probably
logic
not going to
port.
break as often. It's probably not going to break as often, and it's just going to be there. Like everything you need is right there. It's downloaded already for you. You click on it, it's going to boot fast. Everything's optimized. It's efficient. It works on their system. I understand that appeal. I definitely do. And who knows? Maybe when I'm in my 60s, I'll switch over. But for now, I'm doing okay.
yeah.
I get it though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Again, it's kind of like what you said. Is like I think the branding's the main appeal. I think if you're going for something that just works, it just does what it does. My gripe isn't that like that like there is no Apple doesn't do that. My gripe is that like other things do it for just less. And even when you get into the hardware elements, I think once you hit that price point that Apple hits, like you're gonna get good build quality no matter where you go, right? I understand like the Apple build quality is pretty compelling most of the time when they don't do something like I think the 2015 MacBook Pro, where they decide to rest the entire hinge, a tiny piece of aluminum, and all the hinges broke.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Or the 2011 MacBook Pro, where the GPU separates itself from the logic board. I remember these things.
Or when they just decide to strip out the USB ports,
Or they just bake everything on one logic board, and you can't repair it yourself, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah, or the hard drive tiering caps out at 256 gigs.
Oh, yikes. It's very interesting, Apple's many hardware decisions, especially when it comes to making these devices not very repairable by users anymore. Like, you get to the 2016 MacBook Pro, and it's like, wow, that machine was a disaster.
I mean, people are still going to buy it, right?
I mean, people still bought it. It had an awful keyboard. It had awful performance and cooling. Like, they switched everything out on that thing, and a lot of it didn't need to be changed.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I feel like these questions, right? These concerns aren't really what like the average consumer cares about. And like the whole like Apple phenomenon is just like they had really good marketing. They did a really good job. They got that huge like user base, and then it's like a status symbol. Like you want to get an Apple product because your friends have Apple products. Like people clown me all the time for having an Android phone and be like, oh, you have a green message symbol in iMessage.
I got that a lot.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Then I got an iPhone because I felt really bad about myself.
See, it worked. It worked on you. I still use an Android though.
I actually went to Android. Like I had a short hiatus to an Android. I had like an S8 Active. That phone was amazing, I will tell you. Long battery life, like 400 milliamp hour battery. But then I went back to an iPhone. So I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, like even like just doing DIY stuff with iPhone is just so annoying. Like,
yeah, a lot of it really is like super locked down.
Yeah, you can't really like unlock the OS at all unless you like want to jailbreak and like do all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, I did jailbreak mine.
I found out.
I did too.
I found out my senior year of high school. I was building a robot, right, just for fun in engineering class, and I wanted to control it with a Bluetooth receiver that would just control with my phone. And I found out that iPhones literally don't pick up enough Bluetooth frequencies to make that work. I had to borrow my friend's Android because literally the Bluetooth receivers in Apple phones couldn't actually pick up what this Bluetooth transmitter was transmitting. It was just like that.
Well,
like
it's
just
obviously because you
baffled
didn't buy the $100 Apple.
Well,
Bluetooth receiver.
you're holding it wrong.
Didn't you read the fine print?
You're
The
holding
Pro
it wrong,
version
Benji.
doubles the frequencies.
You're holding it wrong, Benji. No.
And I see you still have the iPhone, so clearly it wasn't that big of an issue.
Well, I guess for me, I'm very reluctant to buy new things just in general. This is an iPhone 6s, so I've had this thing since like probably 20. When did it come out?
The 6S, like, oh man.
We're already on the 12. I
It's
mean,
been a
it's
while.
been at least 6 years or something.
Have they started skipping numbers yet? They'll get there.
No, they did.
I don't know. They skipped.
There's no 9.
Oh, they
right?
skipped like a 9 or something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Something
That's
was
the
skipped.
2015 phone. So you get a
Yeah,
good
so I got
5
this-
years off on that.
Exactly. I got this like
Nice.
2015 or 2016. Same thing. Like my laptop is like doesn't feel me yet. I use an NVIDIA. Sorry, not an NVIDIA. I use an Acer Aspire V15 Nitro Black Edition. Still rolling with that. And so like it's like again like I just feel I don't really care about phones as much, to be honest. Like I just don't do a ton of my phones. If I did, I probably want to go with Android. But yeah, I got this thing just as a free upgrade at some point because I just use my parents' old phones. And when I bought my laptop, though, like it was a thing, right? Where it's like I was like, if I get a Mac, right, that'll run me maybe like 1,300 for like a lower tier Mac, right? And like for the same price point, like this thing, in my opinion, has like the same or better build quality. Like when I use an Apple trackpad, like I'm like, this is probably actually a little bit worse than what I'm used to. I like the keyboard more. I like the display more. It's got a nice IPS panel in there, And also I can load like a 1060 into this thing.
Yeah. Wait, quick question, Phillip. Or are you Linux or a Mac fan?
Yeah, I kind of made that ambiguous, didn't I?
Yeah.
He's trying to stand in the middle, bro.
Yeah,
He's
I'm
not.
trying to stand in the middle here, but no, I'm actually right now, I'm on a 16-inch MacBook Pro. I have an iPhone XS, I have AirPods, and
Okay, good.
also
Because I
I
just
have
felt bad that we're clowning Apple without anyone to defend them.
No,
No,
no, no.
I'm
Trust me.
clowning
This
them.
was planned in advance.
No,
There
I'm
is half
clowning
the
them as well.
defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
the defense is clowning them too, though.
I like their products, but I will admit faults up the wazoo for them because there is a lot of stuff that they get right, but also a lot of stuff that I really don't like. So honestly, I'm just discontent, but at the same time, very content with my choice.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I like clown Apple's build quality a bit, and like, honestly, if any company, like, even like as big as Apple, there are gonna be some like engineering fuck ups like here and there. Like, you're gonna have some just like lesser build quality every once in a while. But the thing about like Windows is like when a company does that, you can just switch to like another Windows machine. You know what I mean? Or like even like with like some or like Linux or anything else, like just like having a more open platform is just so much nicer. And just like when you go and switch to Apple, everything's proprietary. You have to spend like $50 for a charger or something crazy like that. It's just like it just adds up. You know what I mean? And to me, like at a certain point, it gets to me.
So we have spent quite a bit of time talking about Apple, and I think one of the big things that we did talk about was, I mean, I expected that though, to be honest. We did kind of set up this panel specifically to be able to do that. That was part of the goal. We've got quite a big diversity here in
Platform
preferred
preference?
big tech companies. Yeah, yeah. But I think something else, we did mention their ecosystem quite a bit, and I wanted to see what your guys' thoughts were on what you think of how big tech companies should interact with ecosystems outside of this industry. So we have a lot of companies that, are, as we've said, they counter each other. They work in the same fields as each other. I mean, the Mixer and Twitch example, I think, was interesting for sure. And it gives even deeper than that. I mean, Microsoft tried buying Twitch streamers into Mixer to like try to counter Amazon's thing. They definitely work a lot within the same industries. But I think that, and this is especially true in my opinion, with the rise of like metadata and that being the big lucrative thing right now, I think we see the big tech industry working a lot more with other industries as well. I mean, there's plenty that could be named. I think the obvious one, which is definitely trending right now, November 5th, as of the time we were recording this, is the political industry. I think that there's a lot that could be said there without getting too controversial. The obvious example to bring up is the 2014 Cambridge Analytica scandal, in my opinion, which was, for those that don't know, when Facebook sold, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was when Facebook sold their data to the company Cambridge Analytica, which then used it to publish targeted ads
So I will
for
correct you
specific
there.
political groups. Yes, please do.
Yeah, so it wasn't exactly that Facebook sold their data. Like my friend was working there at the time, and like
Oh, this
he was
should
just
be good.
upset that everyone was like, he was interning there, and he was just upset that everyone was like getting mad at Facebook. And like in retrospect, like all the stuff that people complain about Facebook, like I don't work at Facebook, I don't have any stake in them. I do think it's unfair to place all this blame because one, they didn't like sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. From what I understand, the way it worked is that Cambridge Analytica was like this data collecting company, and they had like some Facebook app. And the way the app worked was that like like those quizzes or
Oh,
those
did they
stupid.
scrape it?
No, not even. So just the way it would work is that they literally just asked like, hey, this app is going to use this data, and consumers never reading what's put in front of them. Like, how many times do you read your like license agreements when you get new software, right? This I think is like, I think I don't know. I feel like this is even easier than like the EULA. Like it's like the stuff that says like, oh, we're gonna read your profile name and
Yeah, a
your
little
friend
pop
stuff.
up.
Yeah, and the thing is like, since it's like one of those stupid like quizzes and stuff like that, no one really cares, and so they were able to just like take all this data and then they use that nefariously. But then like Facebook. The issue is that now it sucks to be a developer making Facebook apps. It's so hard to like use data for like good things because they just don't let you. Which I don't know if that was the right solution to just be like, we're not going to do it anymore. But I think that the biggest argument in like, I still think Facebook can do things better. But I think the biggest argument in their defense is that like nobody else deals with this. There is no other social media network that is that big and deals with this much content like all the time. Like these problems that they're dealing with, they are the first people to deal with these problems. So it's not like you can point out other people and say like, why aren't you doing like them? They're doing it better. There's nobody else. So
I mean, I will say I think Twitter does a slightly better job. I do understand it's still a different volume of data.
Yeah, I do think that all social media should like enforce fact checking. Like that's inherently political, but like whatever. I think that I really disagreed with like Mark Zuckerberg saying like, oh, I don't want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth when it already kind of is. You can't like say no. I actually just recently watched this documentary like a week ago. I think everyone should watch this, especially if you're in tech. It's
Say
called
the social
1,000
dilemma.
Cuts.
Oh, never
No,
mind.
it's called 1,000 Cuts. It's about this like news publication called Rappler in the Philippines, and it chronicles the rise of Duterte and like the attacks on Rappler and like its CEO Maria Ressa and like her employees for basically like the fake news and like the social media manipulation of radicalizing like people in the Philippines to like vote in this like fascist leader who like has his police go around and like kill people on the premise of they're drug users, which is a bad thing. And there was this like this is like I guess the eye-opening part of that documentary for me was Maria Ressa, the CEO of Rappler, is talking about how when she spoke with the whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica, he was saying that all these strategies, we try it in countries like the Philippines because their governments are weaker. They're not going to stop us. And then once it works there, we'll just do it in the U.S. And as you can tell, they kind of did do it here in the U.S. So I think it is definitely like if you're in tech, it is your duty to make sure that you think about how your tech can be like misused. Now you can't cover all those cases, but I don't think saying like, taking a step back and being like, we can't do anything. I don't think that's the right answer. And I also don't think that you should please everybody, right? Like I think in the case of like social media, like I'm not going to name names, but I think there's a clear right and a clear wrong. And at some point you just have to stop caring about offending certain people and just ensure that truth and reason are what are spread on your network. That's what
I
I
think
have to
that's
say about that.
something that I do want to point out before. I think that multiple people here have multiple thoughts on this, which I will definitely let you get into. But something specifically regarding all that I think is super interesting to talk about is that right now there seems to be this backlash. Now that people have kind of understood how much data has already been gathered on them and how much can be done with this, there seems to be this backlash against like those companies. And I think that one of the ways in which that's being taken is trying to get companies to take more responsibility for what's on their platforms. And that's like the whole platform liability problem, right? And people keep saying something that I don't understand. I would love to get your thoughts on it as well. They say the way to fix this whole issue of censoring on platforms and to make it better and all this and that is to repeal Section 230 of the 1996 Communication Decency Act, which for those that don't know, basically says that large companies that host, or not large companies, but companies that host content like YouTube, like Facebook, are not liable for the content that is hosted on them. So if I go on YouTube right now and I make some terrible video, offends a ton of people, let's even say it's illegal. I don't know about the legal one, but you can't sue YouTube for my content. You have to sue me. If you repeal this act, these companies can be held personally, like they can be held liable for anything that any user uploads on them. That's not going to make like the censoring better. That's just going to make them censor everything, in my opinion. Like they're going to have no choice. Otherwise, they are going to they would rather lose content than have a quadrillion lawsuits on their hands. So that's an interesting thing to see as well, like what people think the solution to some of these problems is, and I personally don't think that's it.
I mean,
Rudy, you painted a really funny picture in my head earlier, just like Alan vehemently defending Facebook, but but I was going to say that I think it's challenging because I'm not particularly sympathetic to this whole like conservatives are being censored on the internet type thing that like Congress decides that they need to bring up every single time they interview any tech person. But I think there is a real argument to be made that modern tech companies, in sort of how almost monopolistic you could say they are on having just already this investment into data centers, this large ability to host this much data and this much constant activity in a way that a startup just simply can't, should be responsible to some other form of regulation around like permitted speech on their platforms, and the fact that I think everyone says they're private companies. They're not the government. They shouldn't be beholden to allow free speech in the same sense. And I agree that like that in general, a private company can choose what they do or do not want on their platform. Like if you want your app to only let you talk about like food, for example, like it doesn't make sense to like allow stuff that's non-food related. I think Twitch had that for a while with gaming, at least, is they didn't want anything non-gaming on their platform, and then they sort of loosened up on that over time. But I would add that I think that in the case of these companies, which have sort of become so general purpose and so large, that they do kind of control many of the common pathways of communication. So there should be some regulation around that, which does define which kinds of speech they're required to allow, but at the same time include provisions for them to crack down on misinformation.
I feel like this conversation would be a lot more spicy if we had a Facebook employee here. But
that would be certainly interesting, but also might be bullying. I'm not sure.
To your point about Section 230, I wholeheartedly agree. Like the whole repeal Section 230 thing, like let's be real. There's an overwhelming majority of a certain political party that wants this done, and like I think that it is absurd because it's like the same. Basically, if you repeal Section 230 and you force like companies to be liable for this, that's not going to stop people posting. They're still going to post it. Now you're also just basically like ruining these companies because they're going to spend so much money in litigation instead of like doing other things that are more productive. I think the better thing, is just I think though, like, and this might be a hot take, I think that companies like Facebook and whatever, they should go ahead and censor things that are bad. Bad is a subjective term, but like whatever. Facebook is a private company; they can define what's bad. Like YouTube has actually been doing this. There was an article I read on Wired that was pretty good. That was basically talking about how like YouTube made a concerted effort to improve their algorithm to like they can't remove things, but what was the word they used? Basically like
It would
not amplify.
deprioritize them. Yeah, so like their
Yeah.
algorithm wouldn't show these things to people. So the
Yeah, it
content's
feels
still
like
there.
fake news and whatnot. Yeah, basically, like it's still there, but you won't get like, it won't be shown as like, oh, watch this next or whatever. And I think that's something that all social media stuff should do. For like, I think everyone can agree on a few clear things that are bad, like inciting violence, like that. That's like clear. Like if you say that you should like hurt people, then you should just get insta banned, like whatever. And like if a certain group of people gets really angry about that, well, they can make their own. Just like they did with Reddit. So a bunch of far right people opened
Vote?
their own
Was it
vote.
Yeah,
It's like there's like a
remember.
far right Twitter now too.
What is it called?
Nobody uses it.
No.
There's this far right Twitter called Parler. I think all the Proud Boys are on there now.
Yeah, and it's like I'm totally fine with like pushing off all any like I'd say bad actors off into like a different part of the internet where the rest of us normal people don't have to deal with it. And I think that like Facebook, Twitter, whatever, they definitely should be arbiters of truth because like, they are empowered as private companies to do whatever they want with their platform. And I don't think they should be beholden to, oh, you're censoring me, blah, 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 because they're not a government. Like you're not like forced to use Facebook. You use it because you want to. And if you disagree with something that they do, just don't use it anymore.
I'm going to bring this up once we have a dystopia.
I think there were some caveats there, right? I think the caveat that is there's just simply no platform that holds the same massive data as a Facebook or a Twitter, just like in any capacity. Well, at least no public-facing company. You know what I mean? And in the other sense, there's this very real concern, I think, where you have like Facebook had a project to go and bring the internet, right, to these very underserved countries, very low-income countries. And they had internet, but their entire internet was revolving around Facebook, right? And so that very much becomes their one mechanism of online speech. And again, I think they should be able to, for the most part, control what is and is not on their platform. Like I'm in support of that for the most part. But I do think once you hit a critical mass like these companies have, you do have some obligation to enable communication, like in at least some semblance of speech. Like I don't think it's total free speech, but I also don't think it's the opposite where they can whether they should be allowed to completely decide what is and isn't on their platform. Because I think just by virtue of controlling that much data, they should have at least some public obligation.
I'd also just like to point out, I think people might not get an idea of like the scale of some of the stuff we're talking about here. Facebook owns their website, obviously, which despite what a little Zoomer generation of ours seems to believe, is still very much used. Is still far and away the most used social media platform statistically. But not only that, they also own Instagram. They own WhatsApp, which are massive. Facebook as a company is basically what Benji said. I think far and away the most metadata when it comes to those social media companies than anybody else, and it's not even close. So I think the question there lies in really the crux is like, how much are these companies to be held responsible for their platforms? Like, should they just be able to have free reign and do whatever they want? Should they be reliable for the content on there in as much as censoring, or should they really have a responsibility to give people the right to communicate and just have that platform? And I think that one of the interesting things to consider is that a lot of the times we look at that and we say, well, if you don't like it, you can just leave. Like, let them do what they want, and then if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. Or that, like, people have other options. People don't need to use Facebook. There are other things that they could use. But I think at the end of the day, you have to look at what the people are using. It's not about whether there are alternatives. It's about whether they actually get used enough to make it so that you don't need to hold Facebook accountable. And at the end of the day, they're not. They're just simply not. The biggest like 5 social media networks, I believe like 3 or 4 of which are owned by Facebook, are like far and away used more than everything else. And I think that there's very little that those companies could do, short of censoring people, and even then I'm not sure, to make people switch. Because people are just so ingrained, in my opinion, in like what they use and how they communicate. So at that point, it's like, yes, there are alternatives. Yes, there are other things that people could switch to. But if they don't switch, then is there like, how do you work those alternatives into this conversation? Because at the end of the day, they're still going to be relying on Facebook.
I think we're now starting to split into 2 conversations. So like the first one, I'll address about like censoring, I'd say, quote unquote, bad content. I think that, I personally, I don't care about those people who post that bad content. Like, where are they going to go? Not my problem. But for like, let's say the average user, right? Like, yes, it is definitely better for consumers for there to be competition in the market. So I do agree that there should be like government regulation for like all companies. Like, one thing that really grinds my gears is like politicians, like right now, like Elizabeth Warren and like others who are calling for like trust busting of specifically tech companies, when like there are so many other monopolies that have existed for far longer that everybody hates. Like, how many people do you know say, I love Comcast? Like, nobody. Okay, like ISPs are horrible. They are horrible monopolies. They actually do like, they're like gangs. Like, they do turf wars. They're like, I'm gonna take this.
It's actually
down,
terrible.
Oh yeah, it's awful.
and governments don't do anything about it.
The amount of government money that they've siphoned off to improve their infrastructure and just never gone through with it.
Exactly.
We could do an episode on them alone.
Google tried making Google Fi, and the reason it didn't work out is just because like they don't have the thing is like they weren't able to make these like the new like line. They couldn't like lay down fiber basically, because like you'd have to talk to the government for that, and then ISPs will lobby against it, and so then Google would have to basically like license out like these like fiber from ISPs, and of course they're going to get charged an exorbitant price, so they can't really do anything. That's pretty anti-competitive. I'm not saying the big tech isn't anti-competitive in its own ways, but I'm saying like if you're going to go trust busting, you got to be an even playing field. Like, everyone's getting busted. But I do agree that there should be regulation, and like to the point of like social media, I think like at the end of the day, companies, all they care about is money. Like, everyone's going to say they care about the world, they want to fix everything, but money, like capitalism drives everything. And if you want change, you need regulation. You could make regulation to say that like, like you're going to get fined every time like some fake news like reaches X amount of like views. And then I bet you very quickly all social media will make great innovations in fake news detection or whatever. As soon as you cut off their access to money, people will do something about it. And I think the only way to get regulation is you need to vote. But that's another thing.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of sad because most lawmakers just don't even know about like anything that goes on digitally. And you can see that whenever they have these conferences, they bring in like some like tech person, or they bring in like some CEO of like like Facebook or Google or whatever, and then they'll start asking them like, oh, can you like help me like block content on my daughter's iPhone? And the guy from Google has to go, we're Google, we don't make iPhones.
Fix my printer, please.
Oh, printers are a lost cause. Just buy a new one and really destroy the old one.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we could talk about on this. I mean, even just recently, on October 20th, we had the Google antitrust lawsuit coming through from the Department of Justice, I believe, which, I mean, for those that might not know, a lot of people were calling it kind of a carbon copy of the 1998 Microsoft antitrust lawsuit, which I think, look at you over there, Microsoft guy. I think that changed the landscape a lot. I mean, back in the day, it was about Microsoft allegedly trying to undermine their competition, specifically Netscape, with some of their actions with their browser and their other products, and trying to really create a monopoly, which I think they ended up getting charged on, appealed it, and then it got overturned. But it was very close to creating some much stricter laws on that big tech stuff, and now it's starting to happen again. People are saying that this is the strictest thing we've come to since that Microsoft lawsuit with Google. And I haven't read the specifics, but it's definitely interesting to see how, from that monopoly side of things, the world is going to react once they realize how big these companies are. Because I really don't think the chip has sort of fallen yet for a lot of people, especially the lawmakers. They might not have grown up in this world, a lot of them, but it's here to stay, and there's just such a ridiculous amount of power in their hands right now. I think there's obviously a lot of examples that we can give, but just the one that I like to give, which I think is very scary, is so much of the world's content is distributed by Google nowadays. Like, there are content hosted on the sites, yes, but a lot of people get to those sites through Google. And legally, I do not think there is any repercussion right now if Google was to decide they wanted to alter the results of their search engine. Yes, a lot of people would stop using it. But the question is, how much damage could they inflict in that span of time, and would there be any repercussions for it? I would say a lot, and there would be no repercussions, which is very scary. I don't want to say the makings of a dystopia, but Orwell is watching us.
Yeah, I think between AWS, Azure, and Google, like, that's like
These
some
entire
ridiculous.
internet.
Yeah, some ridiculous
It's so
proportion
bad.
of data.
That's
on the
99%
internet.
of the internet right there.
Yeah, very scary.
I never considered that, like, about Google changing their search results. And I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, they could. I don't think they would, but they could, and that would be
totally
pretty scary.
could.
You wouldn't know. I mean, I have faith in, like, the engineers, right? Because at the end of the day, like, the engineers are the ones going to do it, and that's why I think, like, all those, like, conspiracies or people say. Actually, I'm going to contradict myself here. Like, most conspiracies that people say about, like, tech companies, I feel like they aren't true, because if they were true, someone would talk about it. There's just too many engineers for them to, like, all keep a secret if it was, like, really bad. But the reason I say I contradict myself is just recently I feel like Google is listening to me when they shouldn't be, because you know how, like, the assistant thing, like, you say hey or okay, and then I just don't want to say it because then my phone's going to go off.
Yeah, me too.
And it's going to listen, right? I remember talking with my mom like a month ago. We were just talking about the car, and like she said Mercedes because it's a Mercedes. And then Google, like, rewards, like there you do answer a survey and then you get like 10 cents or something. So then, like, a few days later, I get a survey being like, have you recently searched for Mercedes Benz? And I was like, no, I haven't. Like,
I have a very
you're listening to me.
Why would you suggest that?
Experience to that. I have a very similar one, and it's a little freaky. I was talking to, like, my significant other about, like, clothing and stuff. I was talking to my girlfriend about clothing. Like, the next, like, day or something, she goes on Instagram and gets an ad for that specific clothing item we were talking about, and I was very freaked out. How does this happen? I don't know.
I've heard way too
explain it.
many of those stories for it to be
can't
be a
coincidence.
For me, mine's a little bit funnier. I was like on Snapchat, like, talking to my friend. I'm like, yeah, I'm really getting fucked by finals this semester. And then I start getting ads for condoms in the gay dating app. So,
oh man,
that's hilarious. Yeah, I think there's just
way.
I didn't really used to believe those stories because it hasn't happened to me extensively.
Yeah,
but I have heard so many at this point. It's like, dude, there's no way. There's no way, right? Like, the tech is there. There's really no way to keep them accountable. It's like, there's no way, right? And I think it's interesting the way that you put it, Rudy. You were like, yeah, there's like so many engineers, somebody would talk. I'd like to think so too, but then when you think, like, what that argument boils down to is let's trust the big conglomerates. Let's just put all of our faith in the conglomerates. Let's give them all their power. Let them run the world.
Well,
They definitely will not stab us in the back for money. They definitely will not.
in that case, we're not trusting the conglomerates, right? We're trusting the people. And if Edward Snowden from the CIA is able to do that,
NSA?
then
Yeah.
or NSA, my bad,
did
3-letter
both.
acronyms. But
those 3-letter acronyms are pesky.
yeah, but like if someone from like a government agency, who got basically exiled from his country, I feel like there are lower stakes for just saying things like at a company. You're just gonna get fired, worst case. So I believe in people, but I want to go back to your thing about the antitrust thing. So when I was thinking about that, like, I don't think that it is the same thing as a Microsoft case, and I am not biased. I'm not saying this just because I work in Microsoft, but in my opinion, I think the Microsoft case was the government being a bunch of boomers, because they were basically saying that you're bundling Edge with Windows, nobody's going to use anything else, and like, as Chrome has shown you, that is not true. Like I'm a big Windows user. I love Microsoft, but when Chrome came out, like the first thing I do every time I get a new computer is just like install Chrome instead of the default. Like, I still do that now just by habit, but maybe that'll change in the future. I'm just catching up. But Google's case is different. It's not that they're bundling things by default. The thing that they pointed out was that they pay other companies to make Google search the default. And they say that, like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, yeah, there's people are going to use it. But the thing is, like, if it doesn't matter, why are you paying Apple $1 billion a year to make a Google search the default? If it really didn't matter, you wouldn't be spending $1 billion. Clearly, they are making more in revenue than $1 billion for this, because it wouldn't be profitable otherwise. And the thing is, I'm sure that, like, if when you got a phone or whatever and it asked you what search engine do you want to use, people are going to pick Google anyway, because, like, I mean, it is the best. Undoubtedly, it is just the best at, like, finding things.
No matter how many Bing ads I watch, I mean, yeah, I'm still using Google.
Yeah, like, it's really they're good at what they do. And the thing is, most people would probably still use Google. And that's why I just don't get, like, it'd be so easy for Google to just be like, sure, you win, we won't pay $1 billion anymore, and, like, I'm sure they'd still be fine. So I find it very interesting that they're fighting this, maybe just on principle, but I don't think it's the same thing as the Microsoft case. In my opinion, Microsoft didn't lose, right? Because Edge's, or like Internet Explorer Edge, is still bundled with Windows. So.
They appealed and it got overturned.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say the big difference is that, like, if you're paying for it, then clearly there's some incentive.
Right. I think the other thing that's really important here, at least in the legalese, is that precedent is huge, right? So if Google were to win this, right, maybe it would allow them to, like, get away with paying people to make their devices default in the future. You know what I mean? Like, what if they paid, like, I don't know, what if they paid, like, Spotify and said, like, have, like, not Spotify, what's the better example? Like, what if they paid, like, some phone developer or whatever, and said, like, we want you to use Android instead of, like, your own OS that you might switch to and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, like, I think there's, like, a lot of cases where I'm not saying that they let this happen deliberately, but I'm saying it also wouldn't surprise me if they did let it happen deliberately, because they want to win the precedent. You know what I mean? And I feel like something we don't think about is that companies' legal teams are pretty smart. And I know a lot of times what they can be sued for and why they might be sued for and whether they have a good chance of winning. So the very fact that they're taking this to court like this, I think, at least, I'm not suggesting that it is a case that's intentional. I'm saying I definitely would not be surprised if this was a lawsuit that they intentionally let happen. Some conspiracy stuff for you there.
For sure. It'd be super interesting to do some sort of talk on this kind of stuff and get, like, a lawyer or somebody that knows more about this area on the show that can give us more insights on this stuff, because I think it's just a very weird field when you mix tech with the legal things, because I think the legal side is definitely lagging behind a bit. It's hard to see how it's all going to be applied, but I think that is going to be changing a lot in the coming years. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, the whole idea of how big tech interacts with these other ecosystems is very interesting. And I think the other thing that was also, this is going to, I'm not even just going to say we could do something. This is going to be a standalone topic at another point in time. But the whole data privacy thing is massive. And we've touched on it in more than a few ways. But I guess the question is, right, especially with some of the people here I mean, a lot of us have used Linux before. A lot of us may be proponents of more open source software. Clearly, some companies are catching on. I think that this is part of not just a niche, it's growing into something that people are more worried about. Even just Microsoft acquiring GitHub, which is a little oxymoronic. A large company acquiring the big hub of open source material. But regardless, an interesting thought. How do you guys think that's all gonna change moving forward? Because I think we're seeing a lot more people getting worried with that stuff. But I don't see any of them. Heck, I'm not willing to do it. I'm not willing to betray my ecosystem and switch to Edge instead of Chrome and like get like a Nokia phone or something. I don't know how that's going to go moving forward.
I think that data privacy is like the way it's talked about in a lot of circles, I think is a little overblown. Like I think definitely like you should have the ability to be like, I don't want you to collect data. Like that should be an option because like the reason why it has to be there is for people who need it, like let's say like whistleblowers or people who live in like oppressive governments. They need to have that ability to not like get taken in the middle of the night because this company was giving their data to the government. I mean that's like another thing where like government shouldn't be able to force companies, but like can't really do that. I think the like the average person who's like data privacy blah 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 like I don't think you really want the alternative because like for like a normal person, like the whole point of getting like data is just to sell ads. And like I would rather have an ad that is like about something that is somewhat tangentially related to what I want than an ad that is not at all related to what I want. Although I think there are better ways than like programmatic ads, right? Because those can be very easily abused. There's another article that I had read. I really like reading articles, but Wired articles. Wired, please sponsor me. There was this news publication in like the Netherlands, or it was somewhere in like Europe, and basically they were like, you know what, screw programmatic ads. We're not going to do that anymore because we're spending so much and we're not really getting anything from it. And instead, what they did was they just like, okay, like we know who our users are as like a small publication. We know what the content of this article is. So let's just pick an ad. Like, if we're writing an article about like photography, like maybe we should, make some like camera ads, or if we're writing an article about this, etc. And I think that's like a much better way because like even now, right? How many ads do you see on Facebook like are actually something that you want?
Yeah, I think there's this misnomer though. Like there's this like wrong idea that people have that in order to have more technical advancement, we have to inherently sacrifice some form of privacy. I just don't think that's true. I think that just as you can advance progress that gathers information and distributes it, and disseminates it, you can also advance things on the other end that are designed specifically to protect data. And there are different examples of that. There is sort of this data anonymization concept. And I think Professor Bestrovos did a talk to UPE about it like last year, which is one compelling idea of anonymizing data just in a sitting database. There's something I'm working on this year as like my senior year keystone project for KHC, which has to do with adversarial examples for facial recognition, where you basically put your face through pretty minor perturbations of the image. You make some very imperceptible changes to it, and then you can effectively fool a classifier from classifying the image. These are all just things that exist on the other end. The issue is that companies just don't really have motivation to pursue them. You know what I mean? There's just not enough demand for privacy. It doesn't really affect whether people buy things or not. So when you look at data anonymization, the main purpose that people are using data anonymization and progress in that field today is I've read like a ton of papers on this for my project. The main advancements that they're making in that, at least in the field of facial recognition, which is what I was looking at, is for anonymizing data so they can legally collect more training data for their own systems, right? It's not really about granting privacy to the users. It's about just enabling these more complex systems for the corporate end, because ultimately that's how they earn money. They make these bigger and better and more attractive things that consumers use, as opposed to making something that's less sexy but preserves their privacy. So I think that if there was serious investment into this area of data anonymization, enforcing user privacy, you could actually hit a really nice compromise between selling, ad data or user data while still maintaining individual user privacy, right? And it'll be less of a question of do you want your data to be sold off, and more of a question of like, are you willing to have your data become this privatized part of like anonymized part of this like aggregate collection that companies can buy? You know what I mean? And I think that if that's the case, you see it be a lot more compelling of an offer. So I think that ultimately selling data can be a good thing. Like it can be a big driver in lowering costs. Like TVs is a huge example, right? Like I have a 4K like giant like HD TV. And it's a smart TV. It's like a Fire TV, and like just like a few years ago, 4K TVs were like super expensive, like thousands of dollars. This one was like 250 or something like that, 250, 200. Like it's just gotten incredibly cheaper, and the way that they're able to do that is again through selling data off the TVs. So I think again, like it can be a force for good in lowering prices if you have again informed consumers and you have appropriate data anonymization that's both required and audited. But I think code auditing is still something that the law hasn't entirely figured out. So it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, I think you touched on that with the. I want to branch off of what you touched on about the laws and also just like the money. Like I think again, like companies, the bottom line. If you affect their bottom line, that will affect change. Like if you care, just look at Europe. Like they made GDPR a law, and now companies follow it because if they want access to European users, they have to follow these data privacy laws. The U.S. did the same thing. We'd probably all be in a better boat too, because I think there really is no net negative to GDPR. Like it might cost some more engineering hours for a company, but it's better for the consumer. And you just need like legislation for that to change. And it's a problem, and this is a problem everywhere. Is just like people who are in politics are old. That's this unfortunate issues that the people who are in politics are old and don't understand tech specifically. And like the only way you can fix that is if young people or people who know about tech go into politics so that they can write legislation about tech. But then the thing is, like, at the end of the day, nobody wants to do that because you're not going to make as much money as you would in industry, which is the unfortunate truth. So at some point, people are going to have to make that self-sacrifice. And I say that as I continue to work in industry.
I think within the context of data privacy, while we're still here as well, and definitely this is something to talk about regarding legislation, is I think moving forward there has to be some differentiation between just all data and some data, because I think in my opinion there are people, like the general populace is a lot more concerned about certain data of theirs than everything, and it's just sort of all bundled together under your data and you own none of it and it's all being sold to the big evil corporations. But I think people are a lot more worried about things like the health app on their phone that might stream some of their data to a server to get like relative results, rather to like compare you to how many footsteps everybody else gets or something, or like even just GPS location. I think people are a lot more worried about data like that than they are about your browser history or how long you spend on a certain website. And I think it's because it's not even necessarily that objective. I mean, especially if it's anonymized, I don't think a lot of that stuff will be that concerning or can be that impactful. I just think people really don't like the idea that in a server, the basement, like somewhere, there's a server that just has your exact position on it at all times, and how many footsteps you got on that day and how many calories you burned and like other health information about you or something like that. And I don't know how much companies are doing that. I don't have the facts to back that up, but the reality of the situation is some of the biggest tech collecting companies have the tech at their disposal and legally could collect that information, I think, if they wanted to, with just people checking off that 30-page EULA. So I understand why people can be worried about that stuff, and I think if we differentiate a bit more between the types of data that people are really worried about and the types that aren't as important, we will find that there is still a lot that companies can do while minimizing some of this risk for the users.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, when I talk about anonymization, I don't mean anonymization to the buyer of the data, because that's mostly already done, I believe. I mean like at some point during the current pipeline, right, you do have accessible data that is user linked, and it's very difficult, and it gets delinked in the process. But currently, that's something that happens within the pipeline. It's not something that's guaranteed to always be anonymized. And so there's already some innovations that have solved that problem, at least theoretically. But again, they're pretty slowly implemented. I think Google had their own version of that too. But so far as I know, it's yet to be widely implemented.
Yeah, I don't know much about that technical background on that stuff. I'd love to learn more though.
I'd say that when I feel like people don't really understand what is going on when they say that their data is being harvested. So like Google, Facebook, so those would be like the two big ones, right? Like it's not like they have somewhere saying or rather when they're selling that data to advertisers, I can't say. I was about to say they don't store like your data under your name, but they probably do. But when they sell it to advertisers, right, when they make money, they're not saying like, "Here's Phillip, like sell him something." What instead we'll do is they'll be like, "Okay, here is a group of like college freshmen in Boston," and then using that information, an advertiser can be like, "Oh, check out Insomnia cookies," and individual person is being like specifically targeted, and their data isn't being sold to these companies. Their profile is being aggregated with a bunch of other similar people, and then advertisers market to that segment, which is like in theory it's pretty good. But yeah, like as we talked about a little bit earlier, like programmatic ads can still be kind of abused, and like people end up seeing junk that they don't want to see, or there can be bad actors and whatnot.
And I really think it's more of like a conceptual problem. Like, sorry, just really quickly, I think it's just a problem that like people don't like that their data is there. Even if it's not in the buyer, the fact that a company somewhere has your data under your name, I think people don't like that, even if it's not being used. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to make a separate clarification though, in that there are different types of what we'd say are selling data, right? There is what Rudy was talking about, which is user-based ads, which aren't necessarily what I was more talking about. I'm talking about there's still very much companies sell data to data aggregates, right? And those data aggregates have and store that data. And one example of that is actually the Postal Service, right? The Postal Service is supposed to be federally barred from selling, address listings and things like that, selling that kind of data, right? But there's a loophole where they're still able to sell data aggregators that information in like a very different kind of way. From like old postal listings. I believe there's like some weird loophole that makes it work out. But like part of the reason like why you get like spam mail, right? Is because your name and address is being sold in databases to data aggregators. And those data aggregators then sell that data to these other companies, right? So that's more of what I'm referring to as opposed to just targeted ads. I think targeted ads work differently. Typically, I think like if you're getting ads on the same platform as you have the activity, that's typically because the advertiser is in some advertising agreement with the company that has the platform, right? Versus when like I talk about selling data, I mean the companies are very literally selling amalgamations of data to data harvesters who then sell them elsewhere. You know what I mean? So I think it's a different kind of proposition.
I agree. And I think more what I was describing isn't that there aren't like different types of data and how it's used. There definitely are. It's more just that I don't think the public discourse and the legal side has caught up to that yet. I think a lot of people just treat it all as data, and it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Right, because I think there are definitely consumer privacy activists who kind of like raise the flag, right? What they see as very legitimate concerns with how data is being harvested and say there's issues with user data being sold. And that gets trickled through the news and through the consumer who are less technically educated. And what they end up hearing is people are selling my data. And they don't necessarily know all the details of how that works. They just know that something bad is happening, which I mean, to its credit, like that's kind of the job of the media in a way, is to take really complex problems and tell people they should be worried about them in some way. And I think it's something worth being worried about. But it's a matter of if you want to target successful ways to challenge in that issue, you're just going to need leaders in the field who understand the issue that can speak to the consumer concerns as well. And so I think tech also has a very real problem of marketing themselves to gain public trust. And that's a very real thing of like, just like, I think some tech advertising is just massively out of touch with the public as well. And the way it works, like, like Google's like don't be evil or whatever, or like some other company has their own thing. Like Facebook starts saying, we really care about doing good, and here's a survey to ask you if you think we're evil. And it just feels like really like egotistical rather than actual trying to do change. It's like
just another facade.
It's like, I'm already bought into your platform, like you already have everything. And now you want me to tell you that you're good people too? Is that what you need from me, Facebook? You need to tell me that you're a nice, big, good, evil
That's
corporation?
hilarious.
So on a certain level, it's like, I think that these companies really need to work on how they're advertising and marketing themselves like in this very specific way. And to do that, they need to do things that gain public trust, right? And I just think right now it's entirely out of touch. I think not to dish out my own company, Amazon, but like for example, they set up like have you heard about the Seattle Kraken, the new hockey team?
Not even close.
It was last summer. They announced that they're making an NHL team in Seattle, and they announced the name last summer. It's called the Seattle Kraken, but it's being this big effort that's funded a lot by like Amazon, and I think a little bit by Microsoft too. But Amazon's like building the arena, and they're calling it the Climate Pledge Arena to draw attention to Amazon's climate pledge to reduce emissions, which is like you think would be like a good thing, but still comes off to a lot of people as kind of
It's a little on the nose, isn't it?
You know what I mean?
It's a little, yeah.
And I feel like if you really cared about climate change, you wouldn't be building another arena.
You'd think, right?
Like another arena, and you're not calling it like the Climate Action Now arena. You're calling it the Climate Pledge arena, which is like TM corporate thing. They already like talked about,
clearly you don't get it, Rudy. It says Climate Pledge right there. You see, they care. It says Climate Pledge right there, Rudy. Come on, man.
So it's like a whole thing of like, I just don't know who comes up with this stuff, but I think like 99 times out of 100, it's just super out of touch. So don't know how to fix that for them. I think they probably need to actually do good things and then sell the good things that they're doing. But it's like they're even just from pure marketing perspective, they're just not doing a great job of public trust.
I have something kind of random that I want to add. It's reminded me because, just the idea of Amazon owning a hockey team. There's this game I played recently called Tacoma, and I won't spoil anything about it. It's short, very fun, but like what's part of like the plot and that's like pretty funny is how like it satirizes like a future. It's like it takes place in the future where like corporations control everything. And so like in the lore, there's like a currency crash where no one uses real money anymore. Instead, you use loyalty points that you get from working at a company. And like each company, like Amazon exists in this universe. There's like you get Amazon loyalty points, and they have like Amazon University, so you can become an Amazon original content creator. And then like Hilton like suites have their own loyalty points. And I just thought it's a really good game. You should play it. But it just reminded me of that when you said that they have a hockey team. They're well on their way.
Is that like the space one?
Yes.
Yeah,
it takes place in a space station.
There's a lot of cool
It's
content
like a VR
around,
game,
those
right?
premises.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I wonder what the conversion points of Amazon loyalty points is to like Wegmans like value bucks or whatever they call them.
Dude, Wegmans,
Yeah.
I would take so many Wegmans value bucks, dude. Wegmans is
What a world.
dope.
So I think we've talked a lot about like the pressing concerns in the industry, and a lot of honestly, we could have just endless discussions about most of this stuff. A lot of this is quite complicated. A lot of this doesn't have very clear solutions. So it's definitely interesting to see how all this stuff changes moving forward. But sort of as we round out the show, I want to see, on a bit of a lighter note, a bit more exciting note, a bit more of a hopeful note than some of the things that we've discussed. What do we think are like some really exciting projects and some really cool stuff that big tech is doing right now? I think one that I have to shout, I remember that maybe like a couple months back, Microsoft pulled out one of their big like underwater data centers they had been experimenting with for a while. And for people who don't know about that, basically what they did was, the thought process was, if we put a data center underwater, then we can passively cool it using the temperature of the water, which has a high heat capacity, and that can make it way more efficient. And some other stuff with like, I don't remember if it was oxidation or something about the gas that's inside or this and that. But it worked, and this was like their second experiment in like a decade on doing that stuff, and it worked pretty well actually, and they had some really big benefits and performance, I think, from that experiment. So that's something that I think was really cool I saw Microsoft doing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on if there are any other projects or companies doing things like that that you want to shout out.
Yeah, I think Amazon's rolling out their Google Stadia competitor. So we'll have to see if it's as disastrous, but someone's got to get cloud gaming right eventually, right?
Eventually, you'd think, right?
Does anybody remember OnLive?
Oh, I remember
No.
OnLive. Oh, geez.
Dude, I used it just for demos as a kid because like my computer was terrible, but I would just play demos on it.
That's funny.
Can't wait for Stadia's negative latency. How do you have
What?
negative latency, dude?
Did they say that?
They said negative latency. I'm like, I guess I
no.
don't
Wait,
have to
that's
play
official?
the game because
That can't be real.
search it up. Negative latency. I better
You get
not be
free
wrong
Oh
about
my
cognition.
this.
god, bro.
Yes, they run machine learning algorithm in the back. This is just me spitballing, but they definitely run a
Okay.
machine learning algorithm in the background. Like play like 500 games and they just take that.
So
the
it predicts
closest
what you're
input.
going to press before you press it and does that action.
That's called rollback. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with rollback?
I am not.
Okay. So side note, I'm also the president of BU Smash Society.
No way.
Ah, that's where it taps in. I see.
So anyways, I'm the president of Smash Society, but I don't really like the new Smash. I'm an old head. I like Melee. And the thing that's really cool about Melee is that it actually right now has better online than Smash Ultimate. It's not even close. It's better online by like a mile. And so the way that works is there's this emulator that's been able to like pretty like seamlessly emulate GameCube games for a long time now. It's called Dolphin. And Dolphin, people, wrote netcode into Dolphin, right? Which is pretty standard netcode. And so it worked for Melee too. So people will be playing Melee online through Dolphin netcode, right? Or Dolphin netplay. And then more recently, people were like, well, this kind of sucks because it's really laggy. And Melee is like a really precise game. It runs really fast. You really need to hit things in a very precise manner. And if there's even a little bit of lag, you can feel it, like so much so that people don't play on newer HD TVs because you can feel the lag as compared to a CRT, which has much less lag. So basically, people made these adjustments to Melee. They found these very specific places where you can eliminate lag. So they actually, in order to make Melee faster online, they just made the base game faster overall. They eliminated some underlying sources of lag that were in the game's code. And so that was called faster Melee. That was a big advancement. It was even better. But it was still lackluster. So over the summer, they released this new project where people modded in rollback netcode to Melee, which is crazy. So now the game is super fast. You can have like 80, 100 ping, and it will still feel pretty seamless. And you can play with people from like all over the country.
Rollback?
So the way the rollback netcode works is it's like he was saying, it uses predictive inputs. So normally, like in delay-based netcode, right? Like you press a button, the game sees you press a button, it waits for the next input, waits for the next person to do something. It's transmitting back and forth. The problem is that if you drop a packet, the game just stops and it waits until it gets another packet with the correct information and keeps going, right? So that's when you'll encounter lag. So what rollback does is instead of waiting for packets to arrive, it just predicts what the next packet would be. So like it will, and usually you think it contains machine learning, but usually it's pretty simple. Usually it assumes that if you're doing something, you're going to continue what you're doing, right? So saying if you're holding like forward, for example, we're going to assume that you keep holding forward until we know something different. And then the way that works is that let's say you do something different, right? And that would be a problem because the game would think that you're still holding forward. And so you're showing someone else that you're holding forward, but in reality you're not. You stopped holding forward. So what it will do instead is it just shortens the animations, right? It will take a frame off the next animation. So it'll be pretty not noticeable to two people playing. It'll feel like you're doing whatever you're doing and it's still working. But it'll be subtracting frames like here and there to correct. And essentially what that does is it creates a seamless experience between two people playing. And it comes at the expense of like some very specific reaction time stuff, but 99% of the cases it doesn't really matter. And so it creates this much better game flow overall. And it was pretty much revolutionized for, I think, Killer Instinct. When that game went live, that's when people really put out this open source rollback netcode that I think Microsoft still has.
How does that reduce latency? Because there's still the latency of you pressing the button and it getting to the server, right?
So it doesn't reduce latency. It reduces the lag, which is different, right? So latency is you send an input and it takes time to receive on the other player's side. It doesn't actually reduce that. It reduces the lag that you experience on the client side because the game doesn't stop moving, right? Because you're still getting inputs because the game is on your local end. It's assuming that the inputs just remaining the same until it's told otherwise, right? So in doing that, it speeds up the game massively. It's really tricky to implement because you have to adjust all these different animations and make sure that they can be compatible and switch between. And in extreme cases, like it will result in teleporting and things like that. but it almost never results in giant stutters, which is probably one of the worst things that you could have in most games, especially fighting games.
Okay. So basically what it does is it just assumes what you're doing. So like, if I was moving this way, it's just going to keep assuming that until it receives something for something, like it receives the next input, and then it will realize that something wrong happened. So instead of me moving like this, I'll like teleport a little bit to catch up.
Right, exactly. But 99% of the time, it'll be such a small correction that you won't notice, right? Because it'll be like a frame.
I think what Phillip was saying though with the Google thing is like they're saying negative latency though, which would assume that they know what you're going to do before you do it. And they could do that with ML, but I think isn't that cheating? It's like,
I don't even have to play the game anymore.
Yeah.
So according to EN Gadget, negative latency is a concept by which Stadia can set up a game with a buffer of predicted latency between the same blah blah blah. Use various methods to undercut it. It can run the game at super fast frame rate, blah blah, or it can predict a player's button presses.
Right, so that's how. So predicting button presses is essentially how rollback netcode works.
Yeah, it must just mean like it's continuing your already existing actions. I can't imagine they've like come up with machine learning that's accurate enough to actually predict.
Right.
I don't really think they're doing that.
Rollback is slightly more complicated than that too. There are other like small details and things that you got to work out. Of course, like, it's not that simple to implement. But again, like a team of modders put this in Melee in 6 months, right? Which is pretty crazy. So I imagine, and Melee is like a game that came out in 2001, dude. It's an old game. So I imagine that like, it's like, it would be what Microsoft is targeting, or sorry, not Microsoft, Google's targeting for Stadia, something similar. It's essentially like, it's like playing games, but always online. You know what I mean? It's like playing online with someone who isn't doing anything. Is what I see Stadia as in a big way, right? You're just seeing what's on their machine. So in that sense, I think that it would be something that's very rollback-like, especially since rollback netcode's already been like widely implemented and very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stuff. That's definitely something I'm looking forward to seeing how Stadia does it. I imagine it must be a more robust implementation than what we've seen thus far if they're hyping it up and calling it negative latency for some reason. But yeah, that's interesting.
What's your personal preference on like the idea of cloud gaming? Because I personally conceptually, like, it makes sense, right? Like, you don't have to keep buying new hardware. You just pay for a subscription, which I mean over time will cost more, but like, to each paycheck it's not going to be, and I guess that's what the consumers care about. But like the big draws, it levels the playing field. You're no longer going to have like a shitty experience because you didn't buy the best device. It sounds great. But to me, though, like as someone, like I enjoy building PCs. Like I hate the idea of like not even owning my hardware anymore. Like it's kind of already bad that like no matter most like game fronts like Steam, you don't actually own the game. Like you're owning a license to play
just
the game.
Licensed,
yeah.
And they could take it away from you. Like the idea that they could then take my hardware away from me, that just seems kind of shitty. Because like, what about all the other stuff I want to do?
Yeah, I also think that the major limiting factor right now is just American internet. You know what I mean?
Awful.
Like I don't think most
Comcast
have the speeds to
bless you.
to use cloud gaming. You know what I mean? And like I'm pretty happy with my internet setup. Like I got pretty fast stuff once I got my own apartment and got everything set up.
That's really good.
Even then, I think cloud gaming would still be a big strain on that. Yeah. Even with like running a gig down and wired.
Quick question, or not quick question. I just want to come back to the other thing, right? We were talking about the antitrust. I just remembered this. Isn't it absurd how, the DOJ is going after Google over this antitrust case when during this same year they approved the T-Mobile and Sprint merger, saying that it'll be better for the consumers. We went from 4 to 3 major cell phone like carriers, and there is no way that is better for the consumer. And this is clearly a case of boomers just, they don't get any money from tech lobbyists being like, oh, fuck tech. Whereas like ISPs, been around much longer. They're of course just going to keep tossing money. And then the politicians will be like, sure, do whatever you want.
Those companies are so scary to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's just better lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
It's gotta be. Like, we could honestly, that's the kind of stuff though, you get into really technical stuff, I think, when you talk about the ISPs. Like, everybody can huddle around a Harkness discussion and just be like, yeah, fuck the ISPs, especially fuck Comcast. But I think to have like more of a productive discussion, you really have to get somebody that knows more of like what can we actually do apart from like antitrust laws or something like that to make this ecosystem better, right? Because it's just become a situation where that's just like this big pile of just conglomerate bullshit, I feel like. And it's just like, what do you do? They're all so in line with each other and they're all doing like the same things. It's like, you can't stop them all. Then there's no internet.
Regulation. Like, you gotta vote at every single level, just put like, local elections and state elections, whatever, get in people that are gonna fuck the ISPs. Because isn't it kind of absurd that the only way new ISPs are coming about right now is by launching satellites into space?
Like, yeah, that's crazy.
Like,
hey, you can't get them on Earth. You can't run fiber through the ground, so you gotta get up in the air.
Like, if anything, that should be indicative of how bad the problem is and like how much of a monopoly these companies have. That like they literally they don't have space on the Earth for new ISPs to come.
Yeah, have you guys heard about Starry?
Yeah. What was it?
Starry. They're like an ISP in like a few cities.
Oh, I don't really know anything about that.
They just do streaming internet. They just stream your internet like it's your cell phone.
That's cool.
Pretty much to a router in your place. Yeah, I didn't wind up going with them because their speeds would cap out at like a 300 or something like that. But I think that's the other thing too. Is like I don't really trust that model of not having like a hardwire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
competitive Valo gamers.
Especially if you're gaming. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be like, it's always just gonna be an inferior experience.
I'm wired. That's also a thing that concerns me with cloud gaming. I'm a competitive gamer, so I probably will never choose a cloud gaming option if I'm playing competitively. But I mean, if I'm on the go or something and I'm just traveling from hotel or whatever, and I just want to get a few rounds of Tomb Raider in, it's no big deal. I think it opens up a lot of options for people who want a game on the go. But in terms of actually like hardcore gaming, being really into it, not a great option. Cloud gaming, not yet at least.
I mean, like the standard for like Melee is still like old Wii's, and GameCube. So I mean, because it's just like the level of consistency there is just gonna not be rivaled.
Yeah.
Like even by modern PCs.
I mean, you're definitely one of the extremes, though, right? Like, your games are super, like, frame-based. Even, like, Phillip and I, we come more from, like, the FPS world, where latency still matters, and it's nowhere near.
All fighting games are like that. They're very frame-based.
Right, that's what I mean. Like, the fighting game world is definitely, like, one of the extremes where, like, that stuff matters a lot, right? I think my concerns is more like, I definitely agree with Phillip there. I think that there are certain implementations of it which could be super cool. I mean, the NVIDIA Shield and devices like that, I think, are cool shouts. I don't know. I think the NVIDIA Shield streams from your computer to the Shield, right?
They also have GeForce Now, which is their service.
Is that what it is? Yeah, something like that where they make devices or have devices, even just if your phone could do it, stuff like that. I get the appeal. Phone is kind of wonky because controls, but I understand the appeal where it's like devices that you could buy for that purpose, but I don't like the idea of replacing my workstation, my desktop, with like something like that. Especially because I think people like us, we use our computers for more than just gaming. Gaming is a big part of it, but like we a lot of times might need that processing power for other stuff, whether it be more technical tasks or engineering tasks. So I don't think that'll ever replace that. And I don't know. I feel like people who would find themselves in a position where they might want to replace it are just going to turn to consoles instead.
I don't know. I will say when I do more complex computational tasks, I just SSH into like the Rise machine or whatever it be.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yep, hilariously.
I'd say that my fear with cloud gaming, right? Like, I definitely think that the accessibility of cloud gaming is a good thing because it opens up more games to more people. And for people who do want to play on their phones, great. I don't think I would because the screen's too small. But I think what scares me is just like seeing how much Fortnite affected the gaming landscape, or rather PUBG, I guess, and then all the battle royales that came after it. I would hate for cloud gaming to become like the standard and developers only develop for that. Like basically whatever the most like common denominator game is, like you're another Call of Duty, Battlefield, Warzone, Fortnite 3. Like
exclusivity on that would be a bitch.
Oh man.
Yeah. And that's also another thing, right? Is like my fear is we have Stadia, we have xCloud, which is Microsoft, and then AWS is coming out with their own. Like, I don't want there to be, Luna. I don't want there to be exclusives. Like,
no.
The big difference coming up. I used to be a big Xbox fanboy, and then I switched to PC, and like not having exclusives on PC is great until Epic came along, and I don't want it to go that way. I feel like that's just been like a trend really recently in like a lot of stuff on the internet. Netflix was like the first streaming thing, and it was great. everything was on Netflix, and then Hulu came along, and then all these other streaming sites came along, and now all the like Disney, HBO, all the networks are making their streaming sites, and we're back to cable. And I'd hate for that to happen to gaming as well.
Another thing with gaming that you just reminded me of is like not being able to set up your own game servers, which really sucks for a lot of games that have like kind of outlived their life, and now you can't play online again. Like that's my concern with a game like Valorant. Like it's great now, but you can't host your own server if you want to revisit the game. Like things that Valve has done though, like with actually allowing you to have own community run server, that's been great to increase the longevity of games. But I feel like I won't be able to play Warzone again in the same capacity that I have because I can't host my custom server on my own machine or whatever. That's just another point that I got reminded of suddenly.
I think this definitely warrants its own episode, and it is one that is in the works. Between this and esports, that's definitely stuff that I would love to talk about. But without diverging too much, we are quite a while into the show, so I do want to sort of wrap it up by sort of saying the future. What do you guys see for the future, either for yourselves as individuals? I mean, it looks like both of you guys, Benji and Rudy, are moving into jobs at big tech, so that's certainly going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And even just for the industry as a whole, do you have like a hot take on where you think we're going, or what the big things are going to be coming up?
Dude, a lot of tech companies are going to do a lot more remote roles. That's going to be what's the product of this pandemic. As they're realizing like they can hire people remotely and not have to pay for like the Seattle area or the Bay Area or like whatever other expensive urban center, they're going to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I don't think it's going to completely go away because I think especially for new hires, like it just sucks to onboard remotely because you don't get a feel for the company culture. You don't get to like meet people as easily. So I think there's always going to be like those company campuses. They might not be as lavish anymore. If anything, I think the whole remote thing is more greatly going to benefit like people older than us by like maybe like 5 to 10 years. Like people with families, I think that like being remote is like a blessing.
And like smaller companies too, I think.
Yeah,
that might not have like the budget.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I don't know. As for other things, I don't really know. I'm too new. I've only started working at Microsoft like 2 months ago, so I can't really tell where things are going to go from here. But I can say, like, me personally, I'd like to see where space tech goes, like SpaceX and like Blue Origin and those stuff. Because I'm really big into space. So if I can pay to go into space, like by the time I'm middle aged, that'd be pretty sick.
For sure. All right. Well, do we have any closing thoughts, comments, concerns, any shout outs you want to give to anybody that you're like, that person's really cool, they're going into big tech, or they're doing something cool, or any smaller companies you're like, check them out, they're going to be big one day, something like that, before we wrap up?
Any shameless plugs?
UPE is pretty cool. Y'all should apply.
UPE is pretty cool.
Yeah. Sounds familiar. I think I've heard of it before.
Yeah,
I've done an interview or two for them.
Niche.
We'll put a link in the description for the link to that. Or if you're like on Spotify, just search it up.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of this game called Super Smash Bros. Melee, but it's pretty sick.
No.
He's doing it. He's done it.
If you want to get into it, BU Smash Club, we have Melee events every Friday online, starting at 6.
Smash with the boys.
Fullback Net Club. It's pretty sick. That's all I'm saying. All you need to play Smash nowadays is literally just like a halfway decent computer and a wired internet connection, and that's it. And you can play Melee online.
Wired internet.
Seamlessly with better net code than Valorant.
Yeah, honestly, Valo servers, we had an experience, didn't we, Gabe, with the server disconnecting us? It was awful.
Listen, mate. We need an episode to talk about this. Yeah. I could go on a rant right now. I'm trying to hold myself back.
Oh, yeah. The podcast would go on for another 3.5 hours.
Easily. Okay, but I think with that, we'll wrap up then. Thank you guys all for joining me, and I think it's been a good episode.